All right, so let's do a little recap of the first Wizard of Oz. In The Wizard of Oz, there's a lot of things that are true in the book to the movie. Dorothy lives on the farm. Auntie M, There's the Twister. It lands on a witch, the Wicked Witch of the East. And as that would indicate, there are 4 witches. There's a witch in the north, the east, the south, the west. And east and west were the evil witches, north and south were the good witches. She dines with, she goes to a banquet with some little people, and each realm has like a color that goes with it. She finds the 3 companions. They go to Oz. When they get to Oz, they are told they have to put on these spectacles to guard them from the shining brilliance that would hurt their eyes. And so everybody's wearing these green spectacles to guard against the shining emerald brightness, but the green spectacles are what make the town emerald. The wizard sees each of the people differently and appears as a different shape to each of them differently. As a lady to the Scarecrow, as a beast to the Tin Man, as a ball of fire to the Cowardly Lion. But he says he'll help them if they can kill the Wicked Witch of the East. So they go off to kill the Wicked Witch of the East. The witch first sends wolves against them. The Tin Man chops them up with the axe. She sends crows against them, and the Scarecrow ends up taking the crows out. She sends bees against them, and the Scarecrow covers them in hay to hide them, and the bees break their stingers off against the Tin Man. So finally, the witch uses the golden cap. And the golden cap gives you 3 uses of the flying monkeys. They are bound to the golden cap. It's like a genie lamp. When you put the golden cap on, it'll summon the monkeys, and you can have them do something 3 different times. So she uses the flying monkeys to go against them, and she catches all of them. And at one point she does get one of the ruby slippers from Dorothy. Dorothy ends up throwing water on her, and she melts. So Dorothy has the golden cap now, and she uses the first use to get back to the Emerald City. Toto pulls the curtain aside, and they find out that he's just this dude from Omaha, and that he will take her back in the hot air balloon. And Toto gets out, and Dorothy follows, and so the wizard, and the ropes get snapped up, and so he goes off. So they go to visit in the south. They go to visit Glinda, because the witch that met them was the witch from the north, who wasn't Glinda. I think LaCosta was her name. So they go to meet Glinda in the south, and on the way, and when they were in the east, the people of the east, after they killed the witch, were so happy. They wanted the Tin Man to stay and be their lord. And he said that after he helped Dorothy, he would come back and run that land. The wizard said that the Scarecrow would be his heir and could run the Emerald City. And he said he would do that as soon as he got back from helping Dorothy. On the way, they met this forest of animals that were being terrorized by this giant spider. And the Cowardly Lion ended up killing the spider. And all of the forest animals wanted him to be their lord And he said he would do that after he got done helping Dorothy. So they went to Glinda, and Glinda told her that she has the power in the silver slippers to get back home. And Glinda took the hat and used her 3 uses to get the 3 people back to where they needed to go. The lion to rule the forest, the Tin Man to rule the east, and the Scarecrow to rule the Emerald City. And that's how the first book ended. So definitely some differences from the movie, if you remember the movie. Which, it's obviously a classic, but it's so that's where it is. And we're going to start here, and we're going to start with the new story of Oz. The Marvelous Land of Oz by L. Frank Baum. Author's note. After the publication of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, I began to receive letters from children telling me of their pleasure in reading the story and asking me to write something more about the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman. At first I considered these letters, frank and earnest though they were, in the light of petty compliments, but the letters continued to come during succeeding months and even years. Finally, I promised one little girl, who made a long journey to see me and prefer her request, and she is a Dorothy, by the way, that when 1,000 little girls had written me 1,000 little letters asking for the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman, I would write the book. Either little Dorothy was a fairy in disguise and waved her magic wand, or the success of the stage production of The Wizard of Oz made new friends for the story, for the 1,000 letters reached their destination long since, and many more followed them. And now, although pleading guilty to long delay, I have kept my promise in this book. L. Frank Baum, Chicago, June 1904. To those excellent good fellows and comedians David C. Montgomery and Frank A. Stone, whose clever personations of the Tin Woodman and the Scarecrow have delighted thousands of children throughout the land, this book is gratefully dedicated by the author. Tip manufactures a pumpkinhead. In the country of the Gillikins, which is at the north of the land of Oz, lived a youth called Tip. There was more to his name than that, for old Mombi often declared that his whole name was Tipitarius, but no one was expected to say such a long word when Tip would do just as well. This boy remembered nothing of his parents, for he had been brought when quite young to be reared by the old woman known as Mombi, whose reputation, I am sorry to say, was none for the best. For the Gillikin people had reason to suspect her of indulging in magical arts, and therefore hesitated to associate with her. Mombi was not exactly a witch, because the good witch who ruled that part of the land of Oz had forbidden any other witch to exist in her dominions. So Tip's guardian, however much she might aspire to working magic, realized it was unlawful to be more than a sorceress, or at most a wizardess. Tip was made to carry wood from the forest that the old woman might boil her pot. He also worked in the cornfields, hoeing and husking, and he fed the pigs and milked the 4-horned cow that was Mombi's especial pride. But you must not suppose he worked all the time, for he felt that would be bad for him. When sent to the forest, Tip often climbed trees for birds' eggs, or amused himself chasing the fleet white rabbits, or fishing in the brooks with bent pins. Then he would hastily gather his armful of wood and carry it home. And when he was supposed to be working in the cornfields, and the tall stalks hid him from Mombi's view, Tip would often dig in the gopher holes, or, if the mood seized him, lie upon his back between the rows of corn and take a nap. So, by taking care not to exhaust his strength, he grew as strong and rugged as a boy may be. Mombi's curious magic often frightened her neighbors, and they treated her shyly, yet respectfully, because of her weird powers. But Tip frankly hated her, and took no pains to hide his feelings. Indeed, he sometimes showed less respect for the old woman than he should have done, considering she was his guardian. There were pumpkins in Mombi's cornfields, lying golden red among the rows of green stalks, and they had been planted and carefully tended that the 4-horned cow might eat of them in the winter time. But one day, after the corn had all been cut and stacked, and Tip was carrying the pumpkins to the stable, he took a notion to make a jack-lantern and try to give the old woman a fright with it. So he selected a fine, big pumpkin, one with a lustrous orange-red color, and began carving it. With the point of his knife, he made 2 round eyes, a 3-cornered nose, and a mouth shaped like a new moon. The face, when completed, could not have been considered strictly beautiful, but it wore a slight smile so big and broad, and was so jolly an expression, that even Tip laughed as he looked admiringly at his work. The child had no playmates, so he did not know that boys often dig out the inside of a pumpkin jack, and in the space thus put a lighted candle to render the face more startling. But he conceived an idea of his own that promised to be quite as effective. He decided to manufacture the form of a man who would wear this pumpkin head and to stand it in a place where old Mombi would meet it face to face. "And then," said Tip to himself with a laugh, "she'll squeal louder than the brown pig dog when I pull her tail, and shiver with fright worse than I did last year when I had the ague." He had plenty of time to accomplish this task, for Mombi had gone to the village to buy groceries, she said, and it was a journey of at least 2 days. So he took his axe to the forest and selected some stout, straight saplings, which he cut down and trimmed of all their twigs and leaves. For these he would make the arms and legs and feet of his man. For the body he stripped a sheet of thick bark from around a big tree, and with much labor fashioned it into a cylinder of about the right size, pinning the edges together with wooden pegs. Then, whistling happily as he worked, he carefully jointed the limbs and fastened them to the body with pegs whittled into shape with his knife. By the time this feat had been accomplished, it began to grow dark, and Tip remembered he must milk the cow and feed the pigs. So he picked up his wooden man and carried it back to the house with him. During the evening, by the light of the fire in the kitchen, Tip carefully rounded all the edges of the joints and smoothed the rough places in a neat and workmanlike manner. Then he stood the figure up against the wall and admired it. It seemed remarkably tall, even for a full-grown man, but that was a good point in a small boy's eyes, and Tip did not object at all to the size of his creation. Next morning, when he looked at his work again, Tip saw that he had forgotten to give the dummy a neck, by means of which might fasten the pumpkin head to the body. So he went again to the forest, which was not far away, and chopped from a tree several pieces of wood with which to complete his work. When he returned, he fastened a cross piece to the upper end of the body, making a hole through the center to hold upright the neck. The bit of wood which formed his neck was also sharpened at the upper end, and when all was ready, Tip put on the pumpkin head, pressing it well down onto the neck, and found that it fitted very well. The head could be turned to one side or the other as he pleased, and the hinges of the arms and legs allowed him to place the dummy in any position he desired. "Now that," declared Tip proudly, "is really a fine man, and it ought to frighten several screeches out of old Mombi, but it would be much more lifelike if it were properly dressed." To find clothing seemed no easy task, but Tip boldly ransacked the great chest in which Mombi kept all her keepsakes and treasures, and at the very bottom he discovered some purple trousers, a red shirt, and a pink vest which was dotted with white spots. These he carried away to his man and succeeded, although the garments did not fit very well, in dressing the creature in a jaunty fashion. Some knit stockings belonging to Mombi and a much-worn pair of his own shoes completed the man's apparel, and Tip was so delighted that he danced up and down and laughed aloud in boyish ecstasy. "I must give him a name," he cried. "So good a man as this must surely have a name. I believe," he added, after a moment's thought, "I will name the fellow Jack Pumpkinhead." The Marvelous Powder of Life. After considering the matter carefully, Tip decided that the best place to locate Jack would be at the bend in the road a little way from the house. So he started to carry his man there, but found him heavy and rather awkward to handle. After dragging the creature a short distance, Tip stood him on his feet, and by first bending the joints of one leg and then those of the other, and at the same time pushing from behind, the boy managed to induce Jack to walk to the bend in the road. It was not accomplished without a few tumbles, and Tip really worked harder than he ever had in the fields or forest. But a love of mischief urged him on, and it pleased him to test the cleverness of his workmanship. "Jack's all right and works fine," he said to himself, panting with the unusual exertion. But just then he discovered the man's left arm had fallen off in the journey, so he went back to find it, and afterward, by whittling a new and stouter pin for the shoulder joint, he repaired the injury so successfully that the arm was stronger than before. Tip also noticed that Jack's pumpkin head had twisted around until it faced his back, but this was easily remedied. When, at last, the man was set up facing the turn in the path where old Mombi was to appear, he looked natural enough to be a fair imitation of a Gillikin farmer, and unnaturally enough to startle anyone that came onto him unawares. As it was yet too early in the day to expect the old woman to return home, Tip went down into the valley below the farmhouse and began to gather nuts from the trees that grew there. However, old Mombi returned earlier than usual. She had met a crooked wizard who resided in a lonely cave in the mountains and had traded several important secrets of magic with him, having in this way secured 3 new recipes, 4 magical powders, and a selection of herbs of wonderful power and potency. She hobbled home as fast as she could in order to test her new sorceries. So intent was Mombi on the treasures she had gained that when she turned the bid in the road and caught a glimpse of the man, she merely nodded and said, "Good evening, sir." But a moment after, noting that the person did not move or reply, she cast a shrewd glance into his face and discovered the pumpkin head elaborately carved by Tip's jackknife. "Heh!" ejaculated Mombi, giving a sort of grunt. "That rascally boy has been playing tricks again. Very good. Very good. I'll beat him black and blue for trying to scare me in this fashion." Angrily, she raised her stick to smash in the grinning pumpkin head of the dummy, but a sudden thought made her pause. The uplifted stick left motionless in the air. "Why, here is a good chance to try my new powder," said she, eagerly. "And then I can tell whether that crooked wizard has fairly traded secrets, or whether he has fooled me as wickedly as I fooled him." So she set down her basket and began fumbling in it for one of the precious powders she had obtained. While Mombi was thus occupied, Tip strolled back with his pockets full of nuts and discovered the old woman standing beside his men, and apparently not the least bit frightened by it. At first he was generally disappointed, but the moment he became curious to know what Mombi was going to do. So he hid behind a hedge where he could see without being seen, and prepared to watch. After some search, the woman drew from her basket an old pepper box, upon the faded label of which the wizard had written with a lead pencil, "Powder of Life." "Ah, here it is!" she cried joyfully. "And now let us see if it is potent. The stingy wizard didn't give me much of it, but I guess there's enough for 2 or 3 doses. Tip was as much surprised when he overheard this speech. Then he saw old Mombi raise her arm and sprinkle the powder from the box over the pumpkin head of his man Jack. She did this in the same way one would pepper a baked potato, and the powder sifted down from Jack's head and scattered over the red shirt and pink waistcoat and purple trousers Tip had dressed him in, and a portion even fell upon the patched and worn shoes. Then, putting the pepper box back into the basket, Mombi lifted her left hand with his little finger pointed upward and said, "Wee-ah!" Then she lifted her right hand with the thumb pointed upward and said, "Tia!" Then she lifted both hands with all fingers and thumbs spread out and cried, "Pia!" Jack Pumpkinhead stepped back a pace at this and said in a reproachful voice, "Don't yell like that. Do you think I'm deaf?" Old Mombi danced around him, frantic with delight. "He lives!" she screamed. "He lives! He lives!" Then she threw her stick into the air and caught it as it came down, and she hugged herself with both arms and tried to do a step of a jig. All the time she repeated rapturously, "He lives! He lives! He lives!" Now, you may well suppose that Tip observed all of this with amazement. At first he was so frightened and horrified that he wanted to run away, but his legs trembled and shook so badly that he could not. Then it struck him as a very funny thing for Jack to come to life, especially as the expression on his pumpkin face was so droll and comical it excited laughter on the instant. So, recovering from his first fear, Tip began to laugh, and the merry peals reached old Mombi's ears and made her hobble quickly to the hedge, where she seized Tip's collar and dragged him back to where she had left her basket and the pumpkin-headed man. "You sneaky, snotty, wicked boy!" she exclaimed furiously. "I'll teach you to spy out my secrets and make fun of me." "I wasn't making fun of you," protested Tip. "I was laughing at old Pumpkinhead. Look at him. Isn't he a picture, though?" "I hope you are not reflecting on my personal appearance," said Jack, and it was so funny to hear his grave voice, while his face continued to wear its jolly smile, that Tip again burst into a peal of laughter. Even Mombi was not without a curious interest in the man her magic had brought to life, for after staring at him intently, she presently asked, "What do you know?" "Well, that is hard to tell," replied Jack, "for although I feel that I know a tremendous lot, I'm not yet aware how much there is in the world to find out about. It'll take me a little time to discover whether I am very wise or very foolish." "To be sure," said Mombi thoughtfully. "But what are you going to do with him now he is alive?" asked Tip, wondering. "I must think it over," answered Mombi. "But we must go home at once, for it is growing dark. Help the Pumpkinhead to walk." "Never mind me," said Jack. "I can walk as well as you can. Haven't I got legs and feet, and aren't they jointed?" "Are they?" asked the woman, turning to Tip. "Of course they are. I made them myself," returned the boy with pride. So they started for the house, but when they reached the farmyard, old Mombi led the pumpkin man to the cow stable and shut him up in an empty stall, fastening the door securely on the outside. "I've got to attend you first," she said, nodding her head at Tip. Hearing this, the boy became uneasy, for he knew Mombi had a bad and revengeful heart and would not hesitate to do any evil thing. They entered the house. It was round, dome-shaped structure, as are nearly all the farmhouses in the land of Oz. Mombi bade the boy light a candle, while she put her basket in a cupboard and hung her cloak on a peg. Tip obeyed quickly, for he was afraid of her. After the candle had been lighted, Mombi ordered him to build a fire in the hearth, and while Tip was thus engaged, the old woman ate her supper. When the flames began to crackle, the boy came to her and asked a share of the bread and cheese, but Mombi refused him. I'm hungry," said Tip in a sulky tone. "You won't be hungry long," replied Mombi with a grim look. The boy didn't like this speech, for it sounded like a threat, but he happened to remember he had nuts in his pocket, so he cracked some of those and ate them while the woman rose, shook the crumbs from her apron, and hung above the fire a small black kettle. Then she measured out equal parts of milk and vinegar and poured them into the kettle. Next, she produced several packets of herbs and powders and began adding a portion of each to the contents of the kettle. Occasionally, she would draw the candle and read from a yellow paper the recipe of the mess she was concocting. As Tip watched her, his uneasiness increased. "What is that for?" he asked. "For you," returned Mombi, briefly. Tip wriggled around upon his stool and stared a while at the kettle, which was beginning to bubble. Then he would glance at the stern and wrinkled features of the witch and wish he were any place but in that dim and smoky kitchen, where even the shadows cast by the candle upon the wall were enough to give one of the horrors. So an hour passed away, during which the silence was only broken by the bubbling of the pot and a hissing of the flames. Finally, Tip spoke again. "Have I got to drink that stuff?" he asked, nodding toward the pot.
"Yes,"
said Mombi.
"What'll it do to me?" asked Tip.
"If it's properly made,"
replied Mombi,
"it'll change or transform you into a marble statue."
Tip groaned and wiped the perspiration from his forehead with his sleeve.
"I don't want to be a marble statue," he protested.
"That doesn't matter. I want you to be one," said the old woman,
looking at him severely.
"What use'll I be then?" asked Tip. "There won't be anyone to work for you."
"I'll make the Pumpkinhead work for me,"
said Mombi. Again Tip groaned.
"Why don't you change me into a goat or a chicken?" he asked anxiously. "You can't do anything with a marble statue."
"Oh, yes, I can," returned Mombi. "I'm going to plant a flower garden next spring, and I'll put you in the middle of it for an ornament. I wonder I haven't thought of that before. You've been a bother to me for years."
At this terrible speech, Tip felt the beads of perspiration starting all over his body, but he sat still and shivered and looked anxiously at the kettle.
"Perhaps it won't work,"
he muttered, in a voice that sounded weak and discouraged.
"Oh, I think it will,"
answered Mombi cheerfully.
"I seldom make a mistake."
Again there was a period of silence, a silence so long and gloomy that when Mombi finally lifted the kettle from the fire, it was close to midnight.
"You cannot drink it until it has become quite cold,"
announced the old witch, for in spite of the law she had acknowledged practicing witchcraft.
"We must both go to bed now, and at daybreak I will call you and at once complete your transformation into a marble statue."
With this she hobbled into her room, bearing the steaming kettle with her, and Tip heard her close and lock the door. The boy did not go to bed as he had been commanded to do, but still sat glaring at the embers of the dying fire. The flight of the fugitives. Tip reflected.
"It's a hard thing to be a marble statue,"
he thought, rebelliously.
"And I'm not going to stand it. For years I've been a bother to her, she says, so she's going to get rid of me. Well, there's an easier way than to become a statue. No boy could have any fun forever standing in the middle of a flower garden. I'll run away, that's what I'll do, and I may as well go before she makes me drink that nasty stuff in the kettle."
He waited until the snores of the old witch announced she was fat asleep, and then he arose softly and went to the cupboard to find something to eat.
"No use starting on a journey without food," he decided, searching upon the narrow shelves.
He found some crusts of bread, but he had to look into Mombi's basket to find the cheese she had brought from the village. While turning over the contents of the basket, he came upon the pepper pox, which contained the powder of life.
"I may as well take this with me," he thought, "or Mombi will be using it to make more mischief with."
So he put the box in his pocket, together with the bread and cheese. Then he cautiously left the house and latched the door behind him. Outside, both moon and stars shone brightly, and the night seemed peaceful and inviting after the close and ill-smelling kitchen.
"I'll be glad to get away," said Tip softly, "for I never did like that old woman. I wonder how I ever came to live with her."
He was walking slowly toward the road when a thought made him pause.
"I don't like to leave Jack Pumpkinhead to the tender mercies of old Mombi," he muttered. "And Jack belongs to me, for I made him, even if the old witch did bring him to life."
He retraced his steps to the cow stable and opened the door to the stall where the pumpkin-headed man had been left. Jack was standing in the middle of the stall, and by the moonlight, Tip could see he was smiling just as jovially as ever.
"Come on," said the boy, beckoning.
"Where to?" asked Jack.
"You'll know as soon as I do,"
answered Tip, smiling sympathetically into the pumpkin face.
"All we've got to do now is to tramp."
"Very well," returned Jack, and walked awkwardly out of the stable and into the moonlight. Tip turned toward the road, and the man followed him. Jack walked with a sort of limp, and occasionally one of the joints of his leg would turn backward instead of frontwise, almost causing him to tumble. But the Pumpkinhead was quick to notice this and began to take more pains to step carefully so that he met with few accidents. Tip led him along the path without stopping an instant. They could not go very fast, but they walked steadily, and by the time the moon sank away and the sun peeped over the hills, they had traveled so great a distance that the boy had no reason to fear pursuit from the old witch. Moreover, he had turned first into one path and then into another, so that should anyone follow them, it would prove very difficult to guess which way they had gone or where to seek them. Fairly satisfied that he had escaped, for a time at least, being turned into a marble statue, the boy stopped his companion and seated himself upon a rock by the roadside.
"Let's have some breakfast," he said.
Jack Pumpkinhead watched Tip curiously, but refused to join in the repast.
"I don't seem to be made the same way you are," he said. "I know you are not," returned Tip, "for I made you."
"Oh, did you?" asked Jack.
"Certainly, and put you together, and carved your eyes and nose and ears and mouth," said Tip proudly, "and dressed you."
Jack looked at his body and limbs critically. "It strikes me you made a very good job of it," he remarked.
"Just so," replied Tip modestly, for he began to see certain defects in the construction of this man. "If I'd known we were going to travel together, I might have been a little more particular."
"Why, then," said the Pumpkinhead in a tone that expressed surprise, "you must be my creator, my parent, my father."
"Or your inventor," replied the boy with a laugh. "Yes, my son, I really believe I am."
"Then I owe you my obedience," continued the man, "and you owe me support."
"That's it, exactly," declared Tip, jumping off. "So let's be off."
"Where are we going?" asked Jack, when they had resumed their journey.
"I'm not exactly sure," said the boy, "but I believe we are headed south, and that will bring us sooner or later to the Emerald City."
"What city is that?" inquired the Pumpkinhead.
"Why, it's the center of the land of Oz, and the biggest town in all the country. I've never been there myself, but I've heard all about its history. It was built by a mighty and wonderful wizard named Oz, and everything there is of a green color, just as everything in this country of Gillikins is of a purple color."
"Is everything here purple?" asked Jack.
Of course it is, can't you see?" returned the boy.
"I believe I must be colorblind," said the Pumpkinhead, after staring about him.
"Well, the grass is purple, and the trees are purple, and the houses and fences are purple," explained Tip. "Even the mud in the roads is purple. But in the Emerald City, everything is green that is purple here. And in the country of the Munchkins, over at the east, everything is blue. And in the south country of the Quadlings, everything's red. And in the west country of the Winkies, where the Tin Woodman rules, everything is yellow.
Oh, said Jack. Then after a pause he asked, did you say a Tin Woodman rules the Winkies?
Yes, he was one of those who helped Dorothy to destroy the Wicked Witch of the West, and the Winkies were so grateful that they invited him to become their ruler, just as the people of the Emerald City invited the Scarecrow to rule them.
Dear me, said Jack, I'm getting confused with all this history. Who is the Scarecrow?
Another friend of Dorothy's, replied Tip.
And who is Dorothy?
She was a girl that came here from Kansas, a place in the big outside world. She got blown to the land of Oz by a cyclone, and while she was here, the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman accompanied her on her travels.
And where is she now? Inquired the Pumpkinhead.
Glinda the Good, who rules the Quadlings, sent her home again, said the boy.
Oh, and what became of the Scarecrow?
I told you, he rules the Emerald City, answered Tip.
I thought you said it was ruled by a wonderful wizard, objected Jack, seeming more and more confused.
Well, so I did. Now, pay attention, and I'll explain it, said Tip, speaking slowly and looking at the smiling Pumpkinhead squarely in the eye. Dorothy went to the Emerald City to ask the wizard to send her back to Kansas, and the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman went with her. But the wizard couldn't send her back because he wasn't so much of a wizard as he might have been. And then he got angry at the wizard, and they threatened to expose him, so the wizard made a big balloon and escaped in it, and no one has ever seen him since.
Now that is a very interesting history, said Jack, well pleased, and I understand it perfectly, all but the explanation.
I'm glad you do, responded Tip. After the wizard was gone, the people of the Emerald City made His Majesty the Scarecrow their king, and I have heard that he has become a very popular ruler.
Are we going to see this queer king? Asked Jack with interest.
I think we may as well, replied the boy, unless you have something better to do.
Oh, no, dear father, said the Pumpkinhead. I'm quite willing to go wherever you please. Tip makes an experiment in magic. The boy, rather small and delicate in appearance, seems somewhat embarrassed at being called father by the tall, awkward, pumpkin-headed man, but to deny the relationship would involve another long and tedious explanation, so he changed the subject by asking abruptly, "Are you tired?" "Of course not," replied the other. "But," he continued, after a pause, "it is quite certain I shall wear out my wooden joints if I keep on walking." Tip reflected, as they journeyed on, that this was true. He began to regret that he had not constructed the wooden limbs more carefully and substantially. Yet how could he ever have guessed that the man he had made merely to scare old Mombi would be brought to life by means of a magical powder contained in an old pepper box? So he ceased to reproach himself and began to think how he might yet remedy the deficiencies of Jack's weak joints. While thus engaged, they came to the edge of a wood, and the boy sat down to rest upon an old sawhorse that some woodcutter had left there.
"Why don't you sit down?" he asked the Pumpkinhead.
"Won't it strain my joints?"
inquired the other. "Of course not. It'll rest them," declared the boy.
So Jack tried to sit down, but as soon as he bent his joints farther than usual, they gave way altogether, and he came clattering to the ground with such a crash that Tip feared he was entirely ruined. He rushed to the man, lifted him to his feet, and straightened his arms and legs, and felt of his head to see if by any chance it had become cracked. But Jack seemed to be in pretty good shape, after all, and Tip said to him, "I guess you'd better remain standing hereafter. It seems the safest way." "Very well, dear father." "Just as you say," replied the smiling Jack, who had been in no wise confused by this tumble. Tip sat down again. Presently the Pumpkinhead asked, "What is that thing you are sitting on?"
"Oh, this is a horse,"
replied the boy carelessly.
What is a horse? Demanded Jack. A horse? Why, there are two kinds of horses, returned Tip, slightly puzzled how to explain. One kind of horse is alive, has 4 legs and a head and a tail, and people ride upon its back. I understand, said Jack cheerfully. That's the kind of horse you are now sitting on. No, it isn't, answered Tip promptly. Why not? That one has 4 legs and a head and a tail. Tip looked at the sawhorse more carefully and found that the Pumpkinhead was right. The body had been formed from a tree trunk, and a branch had been left sticking up at one end that looked very much like a tail. In the other end were 2 big knots that resembled eyes, and a place had been chopped away that might easily be mistaken for the horse's mouth. As for the legs, there were 4 straight limbs cut from trees and stuck fast into the body, being spread wide apart so that the sawhorse would stand firmly when the log was laid across it to be sawed. This thing resembles a real horse more than I imagine, said Tip, trying to explain. But a real horse is alive and trots and prances and eats oats, while this is nothing more than a dead horse made of wood and used to saw logs upon. If it were alive, wouldn't it trot and prance and eat oats? Inquired the Pumpkinhead. It would trot and prance, perhaps, but it wouldn't eat oats, replied the boy, laughing at the idea. And of course, it can't ever be alive because it's made of wood. So am I, answered the man. Tip looked at him in surprise. Why, so you are, he exclaimed. And the magic powder that brought you to life is here in my pocket. He brought out the pepper box and eyed it curiously. I wonder, said he musingly, if it would bring the sawhorse to life. If it would, returned Jack calmly, for nothing seemed to surprise him, I could ride on its back, and that would save my joints from wearing out. I'll try it, cried the boy, jumping up. But I wonder if I can remember the words old Mombi said and the way she held her hands up. He thought it over for a minute, and as he watched carefully from the hedge every motion of the witch and listened to her words, he believed he could repeat exactly what she had said and done. So he began by sprinkling some of the magic powder of life from the pepper box upon the body of the sawhorse. Then he lifted his left hand with his little finger pointing upward and said, "Wee-ah!" What does that mean, dear father? Asked Jack curiously. I don't know, answered Tip. Then he lifted his right hand with the thumb pointing upward and said, "Tia!" What's that, dear father? Inquired Jack. It means you must keep quiet, replied the boy, provoked at being interrupted at so important a moment. How fast I am learning, remarked the Pumpkinhead with his eternal smile. Tip now lifted both hands above his head with all his fingers and thumbs spread out and cried in a loud voice, "Pia!" Immediately the sawhorse moved, stretched its legs, yawned with its chopped-out mouth, and shook a few grains of powder off its back. The rest of the powder seemed to have vanished into the body of the horse. "Good!" called Jack, while the boy looked on in astonishment. "You're a very clever sorcerer, dear father." The Awakening of the Sawhorse. The Sawhorse, finding himself alive, seemed even more astonished than Tip. He rolled his naughty eyes from side to side, taking a first wondering view of the world in which he had now so important an existence. Then he tried to look at himself, but he had, indeed, no neck to turn, so that in the endeavor to see his body, he kept circling around and around without even catching a glimpse of it. His legs were so stiff and awkward, for there were no knee joints in them, so that presently he bumped against Jack Pumpkinhead and sent that personage tumbling upon the moss that lined the roadside.
Tip became alarmed at this accident, as well as the persistence of the sawhorse in prancing around in a circle, so he called out, "Whoa! Whoa there!" The sawhorse paid no attention whatever to this command, and the next instant brought one of his wood legs down upon Tip's foot so forcibly that the boy danced away in pain to a safer distance, from where he again yelled, "Whoa! Whoa, I say!" Jack had now managed to raise himself to a sitting position, and he looked at the sawhorse with much interest. "I don't believe the animal can hear you," he remarked.
"I shout loud enough, don't I?" answered Tip angrily.
"Yes, but the horse has no ears," said the smiling Pumpkinhead.
"Sure enough!" exclaimed Tip, noting the fact for the first time. "How then am I going to stop him?"
But that instant the sawhorse stopped himself, having concluded it was impossible to see his own body. He saw Tip, however, and came close to the boy to observe him more fully. It was really comical to see the creature walk, for it moved the legs on its right side together and those on its left side together, as a pacing horse does, and that made its body rock sideways like a cradle. Tip patted it upon the head and said, good boy," in a coaxing tone, and the sawhorse pranced away to examine with its bulging eyes the form of Jack Pumpkinhead.
"I must find a halter for him,"
said Tip, and having made a search in his pocket, he produced a roll of strong cord. Unwinding this, he approached the sawhorse and tied the cord around its neck, afterward fastening the other end to a large tree. The sawhorse, not understanding the action, stepped backward and snapped the string easily, but it made no attempt to run away.
"He's stronger than I thought," said the boy, "and rather obstinate, too."
"Why don't you make him some ears?" asked Jack. "Then you can tell him what to do."
"That's a splendid idea," said Tip. "How did you happen to think of it?"
"Why, I didn't think of it," answered the Pumpkinhead. "I didn't need to, for it's the simplest and easiest thing to do." So Tip got out his knife and fashioned some ears out of the small bark of the tree.
"I mustn't make 'em too big," he said, as he whittled, "or our horse would become a donkey."
"How is that?" inquired Jack from the roadside.
"Why, a horse has bigger ears than a man, and a donkey has bigger ears than a horse," explained Tip.
"Then, if my ears were longer, would I be a horse?" asked Jack.
"My friend," said Tip gravely, "you'll never be anything but a pumpkinhead, no matter how big your ears are."
"Oh," returned Jack, nodding. "I think I understand."
"If you do, you're a wonder," remarked the boy. "But there's no harm in thinking you understand. I guess these ears are ready now. Will you hold the horse while I stick 'em on?"
"Certainly, if you'll help me up," said Jack.
So Tip raised him to his feet, and the Pumpkinhead went to the horse and held its head, while the boy bored 2 holes in it with its knife blade inserted the ears.
"They make him look very handsome," said Jack admiringly. But those words, spoken close to the sawhorse, and being the first words he had ever heard, so startled the animal that he made a bound forward and tumbled Tip on one side and Jack on the other. Then he continued to rush forward, as if frightened by the clatter of his own footsteps.
"Whoa!" shouted Tip, picking himself up. "Whoa! You idiot, whoa!"
The sawhorse would probably have paid no attention to this, but just then it stepped a leg into a gopher hole and stumbled head over heels to the ground, where it lay upon its back, frantically waving its 4 legs in the air. Tip ran up to it.
"You're a nice sort of horse, I must say," he exclaimed. "Why didn't you stop when I yelled, 'Whoa'?"
"Does whoa mean to stop?" asked the sawhorse in a surprised voice, as it rolled its eyes upward to look at the boy.
"Of course it does."
And a hole in the ground means a stop also, doesn't it? Continued the horse.
To be sure, unless you step over it, said Tip.
What a strange place this is,
the creature exclaimed as if amazed.
What am I doing here, anyway?
Why, I've brought you to life, answered the boy. But it won't hurt you any, if you mind me and do as I tell you.
Then I will do as you tell me, replied the sawhorse humbly. But what happened to me a moment ago? I don't seem to be just right some way.
You're upside down, explained Tip. But just keep those legs still a minute, and I'll set you right upside again.
How many sides have I?
Asked the creature, wonderingly. Several, said Tip, briefly. But do keep these legs still. The sawhorse now became quiet and held its legs rigid so that Tip, after several efforts, was able to roll him over and set him upright.
Ah, I seem all right now,
said the queer animal, with a sigh. One of your ears is broken, Tip announced after a careful examination. I'll have to make a new one. Then he led the sawhorse back to where Jack was vainly struggling to regain his feet, and after assisting the Pumpkinhead to stand upright, Tip whittled out a new ear and fastened it to the horse's head. Now, said he, addressing his steed, pay attention to what I'm going to tell you. Whoa means stop. Get up means to walk forward. Trot means to go as fast as you can. Understand?
I believe I do,
returned the horse. Very good. We're all going on a journey to the Emerald City to see His Majesty, the Scarecrow, and Jack Pumpkinhead is going to ride on your back so he won't wear out his joints.
I don't mind, said the sawhorse. Anything that suits you suits me.
Then Tip assisted Jack to get upon the horse. Hold on tight, he cautioned, or you may fall off and crack your pumpkin head. That would be horrible, said Jack with a shudder. What shall I hold on to? Why, hold on to the ears, replied Tip after a moment's hesitation.
Don't do that, remonstrated the sawhorse, for then I can't hear.
That seemed reasonable, so Tip tried to think of something else. I'll fix it, said he at length. He went into the wood and cut a short length of limb from a young stout tree. One end of this he sharpened to a point, and he dug a hole in the back of the sawhorse just behind its head. Next, he brought a piece of rock from the road and hammered the post firmly into the animal's back.
Stop! Stop!
Shouted the horse.
You're jarring me terribly.
Does it hurt? Asked the boy.
Not exactly hurt, answered the animal, but it makes me quite nervous to be jarred.
Well, it's all over now, said Tip encouragingly. Now, Jack, be sure to hold fast to this post, and then you can't fall off and get smashed. So Jack held on tight. Tip said to the horse, Get up. The obedient creature at once walked forward, rocking from side to side as he raised his feet from the ground. Tip walked beside the sawhorse, quite content with this addition to their party. Presently he began to whistle.
What does that sound mean?
Asked the horse. Don't pay attention to it, said Tip. I'm just whistling, and that only means I'm pretty well satisfied. I'd whistle myself if I could push my lips together, remarked Jack. I fear, dear father, that in some respects I am sadly lacking. After journeying on for some distance, the narrow path they were following turned into a broad roadway paved with yellow brick. By the side of the road, Tip noticed a signpost that read, 9 miles to the Emerald City. But it was now growing dark, so he decided to camp for the night by the roadside and to resume his journey next morning by daybreak. He led the sawhorse to a grassy mound upon which grew several bushy trees and carefully assisted the Pumpkinhead to alight. I think I'll lay you upon the ground overnight, said the boy. You'll be safer that way.
How about me? Asked the Sawhorse.
It won't hurt you to stand, replied Tip. And as you can't sleep, you may as well watch out and see that no one comes near to disturb us.
Then the boy stretched upon the grass beside the Pumpkinhead, and being greatly worried by the journey, was soon fast asleep. Jack Pumpkinhead's Ride to the Emerald City. At daybreak, Tip was awakened by the Pumpkinhead. He rubbed the sleep from his eyes, bathed in a little brook, and then ate a portion of his bread and cheese. Having thus prepared for the new day, the boy said, "Let us start at once. 9 miles is quite a distance, but we ought to reach the Emerald City by noon if no accidents happen." So the Pumpkinhead was again perched upon the back of the Sawhorse, and the journey was resumed. Tip noticed that the purple tint of the grass and trees had now faded to a dull lavender, and before long this lavender appeared to take on a greenish tint that gradually brightened as they drew nearer to the great city where the Scarecrow ruled. A little party had traveled but a short 2 miles upon their way when the road of yellow brick was parted by a broad and swift river. Tip was puzzled how to cross over, but after a time he discovered a man in a ferry boat approaching from the other side of the stream. When the man reached the bank, Tip asked, "Will you row us to the other side?" "Yep, if you have the money," returned the ferryman, whose face looked cross and disagreeable. "But I have no money." "None at all?" inquired the man. "None at all," answered the boy. "Then I'll not break my back rowing you over," said the ferryman decidedly. "What a nice man," remarked the Pumpkinhead smilingly. The ferryman stared at him but made no reply. Tip was trying to think, for it was a great disappointment to him to find his journey so suddenly brought to an end. "I must certainly get to the Emerald City," he said to the boatman. "But how can I cross the river if you do not take me?" The man laughed, and it was not a nice laugh. "That wooden horse will float," said he, "and you can ride him across. As for the Pumpkinhead loon who accompanies you, let him sink or swim, it won't matter greatly which." "Don't worry about me," said Jack, smiling pleasantly upon the crabbed ferryman. "I'm sure I ought to float beautifully." Tip thought the experiment was worth making, and the Sawhorse, who did not know what danger meant, offered no objections whatever. So the boy let it down into the water and climbed upon its back. Jack also waded in up to his knees and grasped the tail of the horse so that he might keep his Pumpkinhead above the water. "Now," said Tip, instructing the Sawhorse, "if you wiggle your legs, you will probably swim, and if you swim, we shall probably reach the other side." The Sawhorse at once began to wiggle its legs, which acted as oars and moved the adventurers slowly across the river to the opposite side. So successful was the trip that presently they were climbing, wet and dripping, up the grassy bank. Tip's trousers legs and shoes were thoroughly soaked, but the Sawhorse had floated so perfectly that from his knees up, the boy was entirely dry. As for the Pumpkinhead, every stitch of his gorgeous clothing dripped water. "The sun will soon dry us," said Tip. "And anyhow, we are now safely across, in spite of the ferryman, and can continue our journey." "I don't mind swimming at all," remarked the horse. "Nor did I," added Jack. They soon regained the road of yellow brick, which proved to be a continuation of the road they had left on the other side, and then Tip once more mounted the Pumpkinhead upon the back of the Sawhorse. "If you ride fast," said he, "the wind will help dry your clothing. I'll hold on to the horse's tail and run after you. In this way, we'll all become dry in a very short time." "Then the horse must step lively," said Jack. "I'll do my best," returned the Sawhorse cheerfully. Tip grasped the end of the branch that served as the tail to the straw horse and called loudly, "Get up!" The horse started at a good pace, and Tip followed behind him. Then he decided they could go faster, so he shouted, "Trot!
Now the Sawhorse remembered that this word was the command to go as fast as he could, so he began rocking along the road at a tremendous pace, and Tip had hard work, running faster than he ever had before in his life to keep his feet. Soon he was out of breath, and although he wanted to call "Whoa" to the horse, he found he could not get the word out of his throat. Then the end of the tail he was clutching, being nothing more than a dead branch, suddenly broke away, and the next minute the boy was rolling in a dust of the road, while the horse and its pumpkin-headed rider dashed on and quickly disappeared in the distance. By the time Tip had picked himself up and cleared the dust from his throat so he could say, "Whoa," there was no further need of saying it, for the horse was long since out of sight. Excuse me. For the horse was long since out of sight. So he did the only sensible thing he could do. He sat down and took a good rest, and afterward began walking along the road. "Sometime I will surely overtake them," he reflected, "for the road will end at the gates of the Emerald City, and they can go no further than that." Meantime, Jack was holding fast to the post, and the Sawhorse was tearing along the road like a racer. Neither of them knew Tip was left behind, for the Pumpkinhead did not look around, and the Sawhorse couldn't. As he rode, Jack noticed that the grass and the trees had become a bright emerald green in color. He guessed they were nearing the Emerald City even before the tall spires and domes came into sight. At length, a high wall of green stone, studded thick with emeralds, loomed up before them, and fearing the Sawhorse would not know enough to stop and so might smash them both against the wall, Jack ventured to cry, "Whoa!" as loud as he could. So suddenly did the horse obey that had it not been for the post, Jack would have been pitched off head foremost and his beautiful face ruined. "That was a fast ride, dear father!" he exclaimed, and then, hearing no reply, he turned around and discovered for the first time that Tip was not there. This apparent desertion puzzled the Pumpkinhead and made him uneasy, and while he was wondering what had become of the boy and what he ought to do next under such trying circumstances, the gateway in the green wall opened and a man came out. The man was short and round, with a fat face that seemed remarkably good-natured. He was clothed all in green and wore a high, peaked green hat upon his head and green spectacles over his eyes. Bowing before the Pumpkinhead, he said, "I am the guardian of the gates of the Emerald City. May I inquire who you are, and what is your business?" "My name is Jack Pumpkinhead," returned the other, smilingly. "But as to my business, I haven't the least idea in the world what it is." The guardian of the gates looked surprised and shook his head as if dissatisfied with this reply. "What are you, a man or a pumpkin?" he asked politely. "Both, if you please," answered Jack. "And this wooden horse? Is it alive?" questioned the guardian. The horse rolled one naughty eye upward and winked at Jack. Then it gave a prance and brought one leg down on the guardian's toes. "Ouch!" cried the man. "I'm sorry I asked that question, but the answer is most convincing. Have you any errand, sir, in the Emerald City?" "It seems to me that I have," replied the Pumpkinhead, seriously. "But I cannot think what it is. My father knows all about it, but he is not here." "That is a strange affair, very strange," declared the guardian. "But you seem harmless. Folks do not smile so delightfully when they mean mischief." "As for that," said Jack, "I cannot help my smile, for it is carved on my face with a jackknife." "Well, come with me into my room," resumed the guardian, "and I will see what can be done for you." So Jack rode the sawhorse through the gateway into a little room built into the wall. The guardian pulled a bell cord, and presently a very tall soldier, clothed in a green uniform, entered from the opposite door. This soldier carried a long green gun over his shoulder and had lovely green whiskers that fell quite to his knees. The guardian at once addressed him, saying, "Here is a strange gentleman who doesn't know why he has come to the Emerald City, or what he wants. Tell me, what shall we do with him?" The soldier with the green whiskers looked at Jack with much care and curiosity. Finally, he shook his head so positively that little waves rippled down his whiskers, and then he said, "I must take him to His Majesty, the Scarecrow." "But what will His Majesty, the Scarecrow, do with him?" asked the guardian of the gates.
"This is His Majesty's business," returned the soldier. "I have troubles enough of my own. All outside troubles must be turned over to His Majesty. So put the spectacles on this fellow, and I'll take him to the royal palace."
So the guardian opened a big box of spectacles and tried to fit a pair to Jack's great round eyes. "I haven't a pair in stock that will really cover those eyes up," said the little man, with a sigh. "And your head is so big that I shall be obliged to tie the spectacles on." "But why need I wear spectacles?" asked Jack.
"It's the fashion here," said the soldier, "and they will keep you from being blinded by the glittering glare of the gorgeous Emerald City."
"Oh!" exclaimed Jack. "Tie them on, by all means. I don't wish to be blinded."
"Nor I,"
broke in the sawhorse. So a pair of green spectacles was quickly fastened over the bulging knots that served it for eyes. Then the soldier with the green whiskers led them through the inner gate, and they at once found themselves in the main street of the magnificent Emerald City. Sparkling green gems ornamented the fronts of the beautiful houses, and the towers and turrets were all faced with emeralds. Even the green marble pavement glittered with precious stones, and it was indeed a grand and marvelous sight to one who beheld it for the first time. However, the Pumpkinhead and the Sawhorse, knowing nothing of wealth and beauty, paid little attention to the wonderful sights they saw through the green spectacles. They calmly followed after the green soldier and scarcely noticed the crowds of green people who stared at them in surprise. When a green dog ran out and barked at them, for the Sawhorse promptly kicked at it with its wooden leg and sent the little animal howling into one of the houses, but nothing more serious than this happened to interrupt their progress to the royal palace. The Pumpkinhead wanted to ride up the green marble steps and straight into the Scarecrow's presence, but the soldier would not permit that. So Jack dismounted, with much difficulty, and a servant led the Sawhorse around to the rear, while the soldier with the green whiskers escorted the Pumpkinhead into the palace by the front entrance. The stranger was left in a handsomely furnished waiting room while the soldier went to announce him. It so happened that at this hour His Majesty was at leisure and greatly bored for want of something to do, so he ordered his visitor to be shown at once into his throne room. Jack felt no fear or embarrassment at meeting the ruler of this magnificent city, for he was entirely ignorant of all worldly customs. But when he entered the room and saw for the first time His Majesty the Scarecrow seated upon his glittering throne, he stopped short in amazement.